Teenagers searching for their dead friend uncover the secret of a sewn-mouth ghost. The movie begins by showing two best friends named Debbie and Lane playing with a Ouija board in a bedroom at night. At first, the game seems like nothing more than a harmless activity to pass the time during their sleepover. But Debbie is actually very serious when explaining the rules that must be followed during the ritual. She warns that the Ouija board must never be played alone. Players are forbidden from summoning spirits in cemeteries. And most importantly, the game must always be ended properly by saying goodbye so the spirits will not continue following them. After that, they begin moving the planchette, a small heart-shaped pointer used to receive answers from spirits. While reciting the summoning chant, the two girls slowly move the planchette around the Ouija board. Debbie also reminds Lane that nobody is allowed to intentionally move the pointer because the game will only work if everyone is honest. Not long after, the planchette suddenly moves on its own toward the word yes, causing Lane to panic and immediately pull her hand away in fear. Debbie then explains that if a spirit truly appears, they can see it through the small hole in the center of the planchette. Feeling both curious and terrified, Lane slowly looks through the hole, but suddenly gets startled when her younger sister, Sarah, unexpectedly jumps out and scares them. Annoyed, Lane immediately kicks Sarah out of the room while Debbie tries calming the situation by saying it was all just a harmless game.
I don't know if I want to do that. Relax, Lane. It's fun. Then we say, is someone here with us? Someone is here with us.
The story then jumps forward several years later. Debbie, now a teenager, is seen playing the Ouija board alone in her house late at night. After finishing the ritual, she properly ends the session by saying goodbye before burning the Ouija board inside the fireplace.
Goodbye.
Even so, Debbie's face looks absolutely terrified, as if she has just witnessed something horrifying. Not long afterward, Lane calls her and invites her to watch a basketball game together, as they had previously planned. Debbie eventually comes outside to meet Lane, who is already waiting in front of the house, but she suddenly cancels their plans. Feeling that something is clearly wrong, Lane immediately asks what happened. Nervously, Debbie admits that she had just played Ouija alone and asked something about her future. Whatever answer she received ended up terrifying her. After hearing that, Lane is even willing to cancel the basketball game just to stay with her friend at home. However, Debbie refuses because she does not want to ruin Lane's plans. She is also too afraid to fully explain what the spirit told her because the atmosphere of the night only makes her even more frightened. Debbie simply assures Lane that the game was ended properly and the Ouija board has already been burned, so everything should be fine. Before parting ways, Debbie promises she will explain everything the next day. After Lane leaves for the basketball game, Debbie returns inside the house and starts eating dinner alone. However, the atmosphere suddenly turns terrifying when the kitchen door mysteriously swings open by itself. Debbie quickly closes it again, but not long afterward, a loud banging noise is heard from upstairs. Slowly, she walks toward her bedroom and is horrified to discover that the Ouija board she had already burned is now lying perfectly intact on top of her bed. Debbie even accidentally steps on the planchette sitting right in front of her bedroom door. Panicking, she looks through the small hole in the planchette to check if something is nearby. But only seconds later, her eyes suddenly turn completely white, a sign that an evil force has begun taking control of her body. While possessed, Debbie walks toward the second-floor balcony while carrying a string of decorative lights from her room. Completely unable to control herself, she eventually hangs herself to death. The next morning, Lane meets her boyfriend Trevor at a restaurant. Trevor, who is in a very excited mood, immediately invites Lane to go camping with their friends. At first, Lane refuses because she feels guilty about lying to her father just so she can stay overnight somewhere else. However, Trevor keeps convincing her to come along. In the middle of their conversation, Isabel suddenly arrives and joins them at the table. While talking at the restaurant, they begin realizing that Debbie still has not shown up, even though she previously promised to go with them that night. Not long afterward, Lane receives a message from her father telling her to come home immediately because something serious has happened. Lane instantly feels uneasy, and her worst fear becomes reality when she learns that Debbie has been found dead inside her own house. Without wasting any time, Lane immediately rushes to the funeral home, which is already crowded with Debbie's family and close relatives. Lane herself refuses to believe that her best friend would ever do something like that. She keeps remembering their conversation from the previous night, especially how terrified Debbie looked after playing the Ouija board alone. Even while standing inside the funeral home, Lane still feels as if Debbie has not truly left and is somehow still nearby. Not long later, Debbie's boyfriend Pete arrives while carrying her favorite flowers.
I'll find her mom. I should give them to her. Debbie liked this kind.
They're really pretty.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry too.
Meanwhile, Lane decides to go upstairs into Debbie's bedroom because she wants to remember all the happy memories they shared together since childhood. While alone in the room, Lane quietly looks around at all of Debbie's belongings that are still neatly arranged. In the middle of her thoughts, she notices that Debbie's closet door is slightly open. Feeling curious, Lane slowly approaches the closet, but before she can inspect it further, Debbie's mother, Mrs. Gillardi, suddenly enters the room and walks toward her. Lane explains that she was only remembering the days when Debbie always invited her to play inside that room. Hearing those words, Mrs. Gillardi immediately hugs Lane while holding back tears. She says that Debbie always considered Lane part of the family ever since they were children. Mrs. Gillardi also admits that she can no longer bear living in the house because there are simply too many painful memories reminding her of Debbie. Before leaving, she asks Lane to occasionally check on the house and help take care of some of Debbie's belongings. Mrs. Gillardi even gives several of Debbie's personal items to Lane so that her friends will never forget the kind person Debbie always was.
I put these things together for you. Okay.
After the funeral is over, Lane spends the night at home watching old videos of memories she shared with Debbie.
Oh my God, look at you.
We were a lot cooler than we're making this.
However, the quiet moment is interrupted when a car suddenly stops outside their house. It turns out Sarah has secretly been planning to sneak out and meet someone without permission. Still devastated by Debbie's death, Lane immediately scolds her younger sister and tells Sarah to show more respect for the situation they are currently facing. But instead of understanding, Sarah starts rebelling and complains that she is tired of constantly being controlled by her older sister. The next day, Mrs. Gallardi contacts Lane again and asks her to help water the plants and check on Debbie's now empty house. After school, Lane goes there together with Trevor. They split up the chores so they can finish everything faster. While Trevor stays outside covering the swimming pool to keep dry leaves from falling into it, Lane enters the house to water the plants and inspect the upstairs area. In the middle of the silent house, Lane suddenly hears noises coming from Debbie's bedroom, along with lights mysteriously turning on by themselves. Feeling curious, she quickly enters the room. That is when Lane remembers the closet door that had strangely opened by itself during the funeral visit. She slowly walks toward the closet and begins checking inside. To her shock, Lane discovers Debbie's Ouija board still hidden there together with its planchette, even though Debbie previously claimed that she had completely burned it in the fireplace. Lane then begins telling Trevor about the first time she and Debbie played with the board as children. She also admits that she still feels guilty because on the night before Debbie died, she chose to go watch basketball instead of staying with her frightened best friend. Even now, Lane regrets never getting the chance to properly say goodbye one last time. Her curiosity and guilt eventually push her into finding out what really happened to Debbie before her death.
Just something Debbie and I used to do. You just don't know when it's going to be the last time you get to talk to someone.
Lane, it's not your fault.
She later meets Pete and asks him about Debbie's strange behavior during the last few days of her life. Pete admits that Debbie had been acting extremely nervous and seemed to be hiding something. A few days before her death, Debbie suddenly refused to let Pete enter the house and even pushed him away without any explanation. Pete originally thought Debbie wanted to break up with him. Both Lane and Pete feel that Debbie's death left behind far too many unanswered questions. Because of that, Lane eventually contacts Trevor and Isabel to discuss everything together. The more Lane thinks about it, the more convinced she becomes that the Ouija board is somehow connected to all the strange events surrounding Debbie before her death. Determined to uncover the truth, Lane finally decides to play the Ouija board again, in hopes of communicating directly with Debbie's spirit and learning what really happened that night. That night, Lane prepares to meet Trevor, Isabel, and Pete so they can carry out their plan of using the Ouija board to uncover the truth behind Debbie's death. However, before leaving, she notices a black car parked outside their house. Lane immediately becomes annoyed because she knows Sarah has secretly continued seeing a man much older than her who often takes her out late at night. Not wanting her younger sister wandering around carelessly, Lane forces Sarah to come with her to Debbie's house. Once they arrive, Lane immediately heads upstairs to Debbie's bedroom to retrieve the Ouija board she previously hid there. Meanwhile, Trevor and Isabel are already waiting in the dining room, and a few moments later, Pete suddenly enters through the back door, briefly startling everyone. After the entire group gathers together, Lane begins explaining the Ouija rules just like Debbie taught her when they were children. They place their index fingers on the planchette and slowly move it across the board while reciting the summoning chant together. In an attempt to contact Debbie, Lane places a photo of her best friend beside the Ouija board before asking if any spirit has come that night.
If there's a presence here, please make yourself known. Spirits near, we call to you. Is there a presence here among us?
At first, nothing happens, but only seconds later, the planchette suddenly begins moving on its own towards several letters on the board.
This is a joke.
H.
Everyone immediately grows suspicious and accuses each other of secretly moving it, but none of them admit doing anything. Lane then asks who exactly is speaking to them. Slowly, the planchette begins spelling out Debbie's name. The answer frightens Isabel so badly that she instinctively pulls her hand away from the board. Since the ritual has not been properly finished yet, Lane quickly tells Isabel to touch the planchette again so they do not break the rules of the game. After things calm down a little, Lane asks what they can do to help Debbie. However, right after the question is asked, a loud banging noise suddenly echoes from the second floor of the house. Overcome with emotion and fear, Lane admits how much she misses Debbie. She explains that the real reason they came there tonight was simply to properly say goodbye to their friend. But suddenly, the electricity inside the house cuts out by itself.
Debbie, I miss you.
I miss you too.
It's not even real, okay? It's just a game.
Trevor and Lane leave the dining room after hearing suspicious sounds coming from the kitchen, while Isabel, Sarah, and Pete continue arguing about who moved the planchette earlier. Once inside the kitchen, Lane and Trevor see the stove suddenly ignite on its own.
Debbie, is that you?
Lane, please stop.
Is it Debbie? Did she do this?
At the same time, Pete walks toward the living room, where Debbie was originally found dead. While staring around the area, Pete notices a strange reflection in the glass, shoved by an invisible force, sending him crashing violently into a mirror until it shatters. The terrifying incident immediately sends everyone into a panic. They ultimately decide to leave Debbie's house because they realize something is seriously wrong with the place. Even so, Lane secretly takes Debbie's Ouija board home because she still believes it can give her answers about what truly happened to Debbie. Trevor starts becoming worried after seeing how obsessed Lane has become with her best friend's death and tells her to stop thinking about both Debbie and the Ouija board all the time. However, Trevor's fears turn out to be correct. After everyone goes home, Lane secretly plays with the Ouija board alone in her bedroom once again. The following morning, Nana is shocked when she discovers the Ouija board while cleaning Lane's room. The moment Lane enters, the elderly woman immediately scolds her and warns that playing with things like that will only invite evil into the house. Nana also says that humans should never try searching for answers from the dead. She even demands that Lane throw the Ouija board away immediately because she believes it can open the door for evil spirits to enter their home. Although Lane promises she will get rid of it, it is obvious she has no intention of letting the board go. Meanwhile, Trevor starts experiencing strange events after school. While riding his bike through a dark bridge tunnel, he suddenly notices the words, "Hi, friend," appearing on the wall. Elsewhere, Isabel experiences similar terror after returning home from her part-time job at the restaurant. Just as she is about to enter her car, Isabel sees the words, "Hi, friend," written across the dusty window before a mysterious handprint suddenly wipes the message away from the other side of the glass. Strangely enough, Pete has already experienced the same thing because the words, "Hi, friend," mysteriously appeared on his study desk earlier. Back at home, Lane continues searching the internet for explanations about the Ouija board. She still hopes that all the strange events are merely coincidences. One explanation she finds even claims that planchettes only move because of subconscious human impulses. Not long afterward, Lane suddenly hears the front door opening and assumes her father has just returned home. However, when she calls Sarah to check outside, the two girls realize that nobody is actually there. Seconds later, the front door slowly closes by itself. Mysterious footsteps then begin echoing throughout the house. Terrified, Lane quickly hides together with Sarah inside a closet. After the house finally grows quiet again, Lane cautiously steps outside to check the situation. However, the moment she looks at her laptop screen, she once again sees the words, "Hi, friend," appearing on it. The following morning, Lane quickly contacts Trevor, Pete, and Isabel so they can meet up again. Pete explains that Isabel is now too terrified to even leave her house after what happened the previous night. As they continue discussing the repeated "Hi, friend" messages, Lane finally starts believing that all of these supernatural events may actually be Debbie's spirit trying to communicate with them. That night, Lane and her friends return to Debbie's house because they no longer believe the mysterious messages are just coincidences. They decide to play the Ouija board for a second time in hopes of finally speaking directly with Debbie. Sitting once again around the dining table, they place their fingers on the planchette and begin reciting the summoning chant together. Without anyone touching it, the planchette suddenly slides off the board as if something invisible is pulling it away. Lane immediately begins asking questions about Debbie's death. She believes her best friend did not truly take her own life but was instead forced by something evil to do it. When Lane asks who hurt Debbie, the planchette suddenly stops moving.
Spirits near, we call to you.
Debbie, we're all here for you. Are you here? You didn't kill yourself, did you? Did someone hurt you? Did someone...
Debbie, why won't you answer us?
Pete, who has started growing suspicious, decides to test whether the spirit speaking to them is really Debbie or not. He asks about the very first place they visited together before officially becoming a couple. However, the answer given by the Ouija board is completely wrong. That is when they finally realize the spirit communicating with them is not Debbie at all.
On our first real date, where did we really go? By the point in the canyon. Do you remember that? This isn't Debbie. I never took her there.
Were we ever talking to Debbie?
Then who the hell is this?
D.C.
Lane continues pushing for answers until the entity finally reveals the initials DZ, claiming to be the same thing that spoke to Debbie before her death. Curious and frightened, Lane uses the small hole in the planchette to look around for the spirit's presence. To her horror, she sees the figure of a woman sitting in front of them with her mouth completely sewn shut. Seconds later, the planchette begins moving across the board again without anyone touching it. Letter by letter, it forms a warning telling them to leave before Mother arrives. Lane nervously looks through the hole once more and this time sees the terrifying figure of an old woman sprinting directly toward them. Everyone immediately panics and runs out of the house. Sarah even breaks down crying hysterically because she is terrified of ending up like Debbie. After escaping the house, Lane tries calming everyone down by saying that the game is over and they will never touch the Ouija board again. The next day, school life seems completely normal, as if nothing ever happened. While cleaning through Debbie's belongings, after returning home, Lane discovers one of Debbie's keychains containing a hidden flash drive. Curious, she immediately opens the video files inside. The footage shows Debbie cleaning out her attic sometime before her death. Up there, Debbie discovers an old Ouija board believed to belong to the previous owners of the house. Thinking it is nothing more than a harmless game, Debbie records herself while playing with the board alone in her room. At first, she appears relaxed and even laughs a little, but only moments later, the planchette suddenly begins moving by itself and spells out the words, "Hi, friend," the exact same message that has been haunting Lane and the others this entire time. While Lane tries understanding the meaning behind the video, another horrifying tragedy strikes Isabel. After returning home late from work, Isabel suddenly becomes terrorized by an invisible presence inside her own house. In a panic, she sees her mouth seemingly becoming sewn shut, leaving her unable to scream for help. Seconds later, Isabel's body is violently lifted into the air before being slammed directly into a bathroom sink, killing her instantly. Isabel's death pushes Lane into an even darker emotional state. The following morning, she is called into the guidance counselor's office because the school believes she is suffering severe emotional trauma after losing 2 close friends in such a short amount of time. However, Lane feels like nobody could possibly understand what is truly happening. When she later tries seeking comfort from Trevor, he instead explodes in anger and blames her for everything that has happened. According to Trevor, ever since they played with the Ouija board, something evil has begun hunting them one by one. He even fears that Isabel's death is only the beginning and that nobody knows who the next victim will be. Unable to handle the terror anymore, Trevor decides to distance himself from Lane completely. Pete is the only one who still believes Debbie and Isabel's deaths are connected to something much larger. Because of that, Lane and Pete return to Debbie's house later that afternoon to search for more clues about the true origins of the Ouija board. Lane climbs into the attic located above Debbie's bedroom closet, while Pete waits below. Even though the attic was previously cleaned, it is still filled with old belongings left behind by the former residents of the house. There, Lane discovers a photograph of a woman standing beside two young girls whose faces closely resemble the ghostly figures they saw while playing Ouija. She also finds several burned dolls, along with piles of old boxes filled with forgotten belongings. While moving boxes around with Pete, Lane's flashlight suddenly shifts toward a dark corner of the attic. Convinced that the house is hiding something important, Lane and Pete begin searching through every old document and photograph they can find. After researching online, Pete eventually discovers an old article about a missing girl named Doris Zander. At that moment, Lane finally realizes that the initials DZ from the Ouija board most likely refer to Doris. The article explains that Doris once lived inside the house with her mother before mysteriously disappearing decades earlier. Her whereabouts were never discovered. The police even suspected Doris's mother of being responsible for her disappearance. The article also reveals that Doris had a younger sister who was reportedly still alive, although she suffered severe mental trauma because of the horrifying events from the past. After discovering the identity of Doris Zander, Lane decides to visit Hoover State Care Psychiatric Hospital to meet Doris's younger sister, Paulina Zander, who is still alive. Lane hopes the woman can explain all the strange events that have been haunting Debbie and her friends. However, when Paulina hears about the deaths of Debbie and Isabel, she does not seem shocked at all. With an empty expression, she calmly says that the number of victims will probably continue to grow. Lane then tells her everything she has experienced, from the mysterious messages on the Ouija board to the ghostly woman with a sewn mouth that she saw through the planchette. After hearing the story, Paulina's expression slowly turns sorrowful. She finally begins revealing the horrifying secrets surrounding her family. According to Paulina, everything started with their mother, who had always been obsessed with the supernatural and often tried communicating with spirits through Ouija boards and other dark rituals connected to the spirit world. Doris, who deeply admired her mother since childhood, gradually became fascinated with those rituals as well. She even dreamed of becoming just like her mother someday. However, without realizing it, Doris and her mother's obsession slowly attracted something evil. Paulina explains that one day their mother attempted to summon spirits from another world, but the ritual turned into a disaster when the entity that arrived was not an ordinary ghost. The evil force slowly took control of their mother's mind and drove her insane. Fearing that Doris would also fall under the same influence, their mother eventually sewed Doris's mouth shut so she could no longer communicate with the evil spirits haunting the house. Paulina then reveals an even more horrifying truth. Doris never actually left the house at all. In her unstable state, their mother accidentally caused Doris's death herself, as their mother became more violent and impossible to control. Paulina finally took desperate action by killing her own mother in order to end the terror once and for all. However, because of what happened, Paulina was declared mentally unstable and locked away inside the psychiatric hospital for the rest of her life. Before Lane leaves, Paulina warns her that ever since she first played the Ouija board and communicated with the entity, she has already become connected to the same deadly curse. According to Paulina, both Doris and their mother are now trapped under the influence of a much darker evil force. If left unchecked, the entity will continue taking more victims and grow even stronger. Paulina then reveals that Doris's body is still hidden beneath the basement of their old house. The only way to break the curse is to cut the stitches on Doris's mouth so her spirit can finally break free and fight against her mother. Before Lane leaves, Paulina tells her to keep praying because Doris may be the only one capable of stopping the terror. Later that night, Lane returns to Debbie's basement along with Sarah, Pete, and Trevor. At one point, Lane notices a dark shadow standing directly behind Trevor. Within seconds, the figure suddenly drags Trevor into another room. Pete immediately chases after him, but the moment he enters the room, the door slams shut behind him. While Pete becomes trapped on the other side with Trevor, Lane and Sarah manage to clear away the objects blocking a hidden passage behind the basement wall. In front of them is a narrow tunnel resembling an old ventilation shaft leading into a secret room. Since she has the smallest body, Lane decides to crawl inside alone while Sarah waits outside. After crawling through the dark passageway, Lane finally reaches an old hidden chamber filled with antique furniture covered in white cloth. In the center of the room stands a strange altar table, and lying on top of it is Doris's dried corpse with thick stitches sealing her mouth shut. Lane quickly cuts the stitches open.
Lane!
Suddenly, the ghost of Mrs. Zander appears behind her as if trying to stop her actions. But only seconds after Lane cuts the stitches from Doris's mouth, Mrs. Zander's spirit suddenly vanishes. Believing the curse has finally been broken, they all return home, hoping their lives can finally go back to normal. However, after arriving home, Pete suddenly sees Debbie standing inside his bedroom. Without realizing the truth, Pete slowly approaches her, unaware that the figure is actually Doris disguising herself as Debbie. Moments later, Pete's body begins falling under the control of the evil force. In the middle of the night, Lane suddenly wakes up after receiving a panicked message from Trevor saying that Pete became possessed before dying in a horrifying way. Feeling that all of their efforts were meaningless, Lane returns to visit Paulina the next morning demanding answers. Furious, she accuses Paulina of lying because nothing they did stopped the terror at all, but unexpectedly Paulina simply smiles after hearing about Pete's death. That is when Lane finally learns the horrifying truth that Mrs. Xander was never the true villain all along. Instead, Doris and Paulina themselves were the real source of the evil. Paulina confesses that Doris had always been obsessed with the supernatural since childhood and loved using Ouija boards to communicate with spirits. Paulina, who always followed her older sister everywhere, slowly became influenced by Doris until both sisters became completely consumed by dark rituals and spirit summoning. Without realizing it, their games gradually opened a gateway for evil entities to enter the human world. Unlike her daughters, Mrs. Xander understood long ago that Doris and Paulina had connected themselves to something dangerous. She desperately tried stopping them because she believed the spirit world would only bring disaster. However, Doris had already become too obsessed and secretly continued using the Ouija board to communicate with the entity. Eventually, Mrs. Xander took extreme measures by sewing Doris's mouth shut so she could no longer perform rituals or communicate with evil spirits. Tragically, her actions accidentally resulted in Doris's death. Since Paulina was still very young at the time and did not understand the truth, she believed her mother was a monster who tortured and murdered Doris. Filled with rage and hatred, Paulina killed her own mother to avenge her sister. But after Doris died, her spirit only became even stronger and continued using Ouija boards to claim new victims in hopes of one day fully returning. Paulina then explains that the stitches on Doris's mouth were actually the only thing restraining Doris's spirit from completely losing control. As long as her mouth remained sewn shut, Doris could not use her full supernatural power. That is why Mrs. Xander's spirit kept trying to protect the stitches from ever being removed. Even the ghost that appeared in the basement was not trying to hurt Lane, but was actually attempting to stop her from removing the stitches. Without realizing it, Lane had unknowingly broken the seal by cutting Doris's mouth open in the basement, allowing Doris to become far more powerful and making it easier for her to kill the people around them. For years, Paulina secretly helped Doris's spirit because she still believed her sister deserved to live again. Suddenly, the woman who had spent years confined to a wheelchair slowly stands up and walks toward Lane, while saying that Doris will soon take Lane's life as the final step toward her resurrection. Fortunately, before Paulina can do anything else, the hospital staff drag her back into isolation. Feeling hopeless after learning the truth about Doris and Paulina, Lane finally goes to see Nana for one last chance at help. After hearing everything that happened, Nana becomes convinced that the curse has not truly ended and that Doris is still connected to the Ouija board. She warns Lane that the only way to stop everything is to destroy Doris's body and burn the Ouija board that has been serving as the bridge between her spirit and the human world. Nana urges Lane to act quickly before Doris grows even stronger and claims more victims. That same night, Lane returns to Debbie's house, with Sarah and Trevor to end everything once and for all. Trevor arrives at the house first and notices what appears to be Sarah walking toward the swimming pool area. Thinking it is really her, Trevor follows behind without hesitation. However, he soon realizes that the figure he followed is not Sarah at all, but Doris's spirit, luring him toward the pool. He desperately struggles to escape, but the wet plastic wraps tightly around his body until Trevor eventually drowns to death. Not long afterward, Lane and Sarah finally arrive at Debbie's house. They notice Trevor's bicycle still parked outside, making Lane believe her boyfriend is already somewhere inside the house. The two sisters split up and search different rooms looking for him. While standing in the living room, Lane suddenly sees Trevor silently standing in front of the empty fireplace. But when she gets closer, she realizes Trevor's eyes have turned completely pale white and his mouth is stitched shut just like the spirit of Doris she saw before. Now only Lane and Sarah remain alive. Despite being overwhelmed with fear, Lane realizes they have no choice but to finish everything that very night. She tells Sarah to take the Ouija board down to the basement so they can burn it together with Doris's corpse. However, before they can do anything, Sarah is suddenly dragged away by an invisible force and locked inside another room. There she comes face to face with Doris, whose appearance has become far more horrifying than before. The spirit begins trying to sew Sarah's mouth shut with a needle and thread. Meanwhile, Lane desperately searches for a way to distract Doris and decides to play the Ouija board once again. The plan works, causing Doris to leave Sarah behind and focus her attention on Lane instead. Doris violently attacks Lane, twisting the girl's arm behind her back. Slowly, Lane's eyes begin turning white, showing that Doris is trying to possess her body completely. Just as Lane is about to lose control, Debbie's spirit suddenly appears and protects her. Debbie directly fights against Doris in order to save her best friend. While the two spirits battle each other, Sarah manages to reach the basement and burns Doris's corpse inside the house furnace. At the same moment, Lane throws the Ouija board into the fire until it burns into ashes. Instantly, all the supernatural terror inside the house begins disappearing as Doris's connection to the human world is finally destroyed. Several days later, life slowly begins returning to normal for Lane and Sarah, although they are still haunted by the grief of losing Debbie and all their friends. However, just when everything finally seems over, Lane suddenly notices a planchette lying on the table beside her bed while getting ready to sleep. Filled with fear and curiosity, she slowly looks through the small hole in the middle of it, and at that exact moment, the movie comes to an end.